Is it still not, Rena Marie?
Not yet.
How odd.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and start while we figure. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to our virtual site visit with Hidden River Middle School. Our one virtual visit in our series of virtual visits with our first 5 demonstration sites from across Washington State. At the Herring Center for Inclusive Education at the University of Washington, we are thrilled to be partnering with OSPI and some exemplary schools, one of which is here to share their journey today. We would like to introduce you to our Herring Center team. Here today is Herring Center Director Eileen Schwartz, Inclusion Specialist Cassie Martin, and Katie Bateman, who will be monitoring the Q&A and the chat. I am Rena Marie Leon Guerrero, and I will be leading us through the webinar today. Our program coordinator, Molly Lyman, is also here. She will make sure you have everything you need in case you experience technological issues. As we get started, please test your audio in the bottom left-hand corner of the menu. Before we dive in, let's make sure we are set up for our webinar. Thank you for sharing comments and ideas in the chat. Because of the number of people participating today, we will not be answering questions or responding via the chat. If you'd like our presenters to answer a question, please use the Q&A feature instead. We will be recording today's webinar and it will be provided on the Herring Center's Demonstration Sites webpage. The recording from today will be available at the end of the month. We will be holding question and answers for our presenters for the end of our webinar today. As we go through the webinar, please keep this webinar etiquette in mind. We encourage a growth mindset where you are open to thinking about new ideas and willing to push yourself to grow. Thank you for joining us today, for being present, positive, and engaged. In your Zoom invite, we sent you an impact form that included some pre-webinar planning. Please have your impact forms available to reference during today's presentation and consider sharing what you wrote as you ask questions and participate. You will notice the second page is a place to document ideas you can take back to your school team, share with colleagues and/or families. We hope you will utilize this tool to support your learning. Here is your impact form, and here is the second page. Let's practice the chat. Using your impact form, please share what impact you hope today's webinar will have on your school's inclusionary practices. We will be able to reference this information later, and it will be useful for us in future planning. A friendly reminder that if you have questions, we will be doing our best to monitor and respond in the Q&A at the bottom of your screens. Yes. Thank you. And please continue to share in the chat. We'll be looking at this information later. To start, here is a little background information about the Demonstration Sites project. In the fall of 2019, OSPI launched the Inclusionary Practices Professional Development Project. The Herring Center partnered with OSPI to coordinate and lead this part of the larger statewide project creating model demonstration sites that highlight inclusionary practices across Washington State. The Demonstration Sites project was developed to provide educators from around the state with the opportunity to observe inclusionary practices in action, meet with school teams, collect artifacts that aid in systems change, and learn about how to implement inclusionary practices in different school contexts. Over the course of 2 years, 16 model demonstration sites across all 9 ESD regions will provide professional development to visiting schools. Our demonstration sites highlight the diversity in our state. They include urban schools, rural schools, and schools in some of our largest and smallest districts across Washington. In collaboration with Herring Center Inclusion Specialists, demonstration sites host visiting schools to showcase high-leverage inclusionary practices. By sharing these practices and opening their doors to teachers, administrators, families, and community members, it allows visitors to see best practices in action and apply them in their schools. At the same time, the demonstration sites themselves continue their inclusive culture and refine their practices that contribute to equitable learning for all students. There are some founding principles that drive our model demonstration sites work. To start, in every school, there are things that are working well. In education, we have a tendency to examine the problems associated with our practices instead of examining what is working well, why it's working well, and how we can use that information to make things better. This asset-based approach is a productive way for schools to leverage their strengths to become more inclusive. Also, inclusion is not a special education initiative, but a cultural initiative. If we simply change the way we deliver special education services without considering the culture of the school or how all students engage in teaching and learning, we will never make the changes we need to truly impact student learning. Through the course of our webinars, you will hear from demonstration sites that are doing extraordinary things. What is exciting about these schools are that whether they are in year 1 of their journey or if they are 6 years in, they all have plans for continuous improvement. They recognize that as new students enter their buildings and as they collect more information about the best ways students learn, that their professional practices need to reflect that learning. Demonstration sites also know that engaging stakeholders in the reform process is a critical component to making and sustaining changes. When stakeholders are involved, there is a higher likelihood that schools will adopt and implement inclusive practices. Our demonstration sites showcase close partnerships between school leaders and teachers, engaging in true distributive leadership, learning, making decisions, and moving forward collaboratively. We know that there are systems in place in some districts and not others. However, learning how demonstration sites have implemented high leverage moves can have wide-reaching benefits. You will notice the demonstration sites principle is involved in our webinar today. We just mentioned the importance of distributive leadership and stakeholder engagement. However, we would be remiss if not to mention the importance of innovative site-based leadership to support this work. Our goals for the Demonstration Sites project are both simple and complex. We want to make sure that when school personnel or teams visit demonstration sites, or in this case, hear about their journeys, that it provides a transformational learning experience. To do this, we are studying and implementing best practices and model demonstration site replication to ensure that our visitors or participants have an experience where they are inspired and leave with ideas for implementation in their schools. We also want to create peer learning communities between demonstration sites that build professional networks in our state. Through this project, we aren't only impacting visiting schools, but are working with demonstration sites to continue to evolve and change as they learn more about their students and best practices, or as their school culture continues to change. Because one of our founding principles is that inclusion is a cultural initiative, demonstration sites show that when we put best practices in place for students with disabilities and consider how we can implement these practices in general education context and content. It improves outcomes for all students in our schools. We already talked about taking an asset-based approach and creating a culture of collaboration across Washington State schools. An important goal for this project is to improve the social and academic outcomes for students with and without disabilities, and to show that when we do things that are better for students, it is typically better for adults too. At the end of our webinar, we want you to leave with some key takeaways that you can bring with you back to your school team. This will include information, tools, and supports you can use to build, implement, and sustain an inclusive school. We know this isn't exactly the same as being able to see these amazing schools and classrooms in actions, but are thrilled you are joining us today as we share some exemplary inclusionary practices and take you on one school's journey. First, let's start with some polling to see who's joining us today. Okay. Administrators, school counselors, teachers, parents, specialists. Yeah. Wonderful. Oh, we're glad you can all join us this morning. Okay. I'm proud to introduce the team from Hidden River Middle School. I'm handing it over to Principal Brett Willie, who will introduce the rest of the team.
Thank you, Raina Marie. Good morning. My name is Brett Willie. I'm the principal here at Hidden River Middle School, and we are honored to be able to share our story with all of you this morning. Real quickly, just introduce the folks presenting today. Jonathan Judy is our assistant principal. David Parator is our executive director here in the Monroe School District for Student Services. We have two of our special ed teachers that are case managers and also co-teaching in the gen ed classroom. Laura Padak mostly is on the language arts side, and Monica Byerly on the math side. Our life skills teacher is with us today, our structured learning center teacher, and she's going to talk a little bit about our journey to include all students into the general education day. And finally, we have Robin Lampers, one of our key teacher leaders here at Hidden River, who teaches language arts in the gen ed setting and has been a co-teacher since our journey began and a great champion of this work. A little bit about Hidden River Middle School, just to give you some context. We're in the Monroe School District, and Monroe is, if you travel north from Seattle to Everett and then roughly 8 miles east, Monroe is on Highway 2 there, about 8 miles from Everett, kind of on the way as you head up towards Stephen Pass. We've got a little over 6,000 students here in Monroe. We have 2 middle schools. We're the smaller of the two. Currently, we're about as small as we've been in a while. We're at about 420 students. On a larger year, we push towards like 480. So that's about the size of our school. We're kind of in a unique little finger of the district that stretches way out towards Woodinville. So our school, we have about half of our students come from our local area, our community here, and then about half of our students come from downtown Monroe. And I would say, demographically speaking, our school is a pretty accurate reflection of our community as a whole in terms of socioeconomic status and all the other demographical components that we look at. So I want to spend a couple of minutes just talking about the structure of our webinar and just some logistical pieces. If you'll notice there on slide 20, we have intentionally started and ended our presentation today highlighting the important component of culture. And honestly, like even the middle part where we get into some of the more structural components and sharing some tools and resources, that cultural piece, we want you to see that it really weaves in through that as well. And I can't say it enough that our journey at Hidden River has been as successful as it has been, and gotten us to the point we are today because of that cultural aspect that we were very intentional about making sure we started with, and making sure we infuse into every aspect of the work that we do. So we've intentionally built this today to really highlight that, especially to start and end our presentation. As far as the format, we've kind of broken into 3 sections, and we really try to highlight some of the guiding questions that we've used for our staff to ground our work. The important part about a guiding question is for adult learners, it really provokes critical thought, and it allows us to collectively examine our practices. And so we've been real intentional throughout our journey of asking some very targeted questions that cause us as a staff to reflect on our current reality. So we've shared some of those here. Some of our key takeaways, there's quite a few of them. So at the very end, we're kind of going to boil it back down to probably our 3 biggest takeaways that we feel like have helped us get to where we are today. We'll try to share some artifacts and tools throughout. There is a link in here for a handbook that we put together that will be on the UW website that you have access to. We'll reference that a little bit throughout our presentation. And then there's some key resources that we've used, some books that we've read that have really helped frame our thinking and guided us in our journey. I've included some of our emails here below for the administrators here in the building and in the district. So don't be afraid to reach out if you have more questions, or if you feel like you have some things that you still need access to, or want some other resources that you think we might have. We'd be happy to respond to that as best we can. So I've included those there. As far as question and answers, we're going to try to structure this around 60 minutes, give or take, so that we can get to those questions towards the end. If maybe some smaller ones pop up, we can quickly address throughout the presentation. We'll try to do that, but we're really going to try to focus in on sharing our story, and then open it up at the end for you all to ask the questions that you're thinking about. So whenever we get to share our journey, I always I like to start with 2 important caveats that we feel are critical. The first one is just from a spirit of humility perspective. Like we just want you to know that we don't have all the answers, and we don't pretend to know everything. We've made plenty of mistakes over the years on our journey, and we know today, 7 years into this journey, as proud of we are of our story, we know we have a long ways to go. So I like to lead with that, just from a humble perspective. Like we're in the same spot that everybody is, in terms of reflecting on what's going well, and constantly looking at, man, we've got a lot of areas of growth still. So I like to call that out to start. The second piece that I always like to mention is, you're seeing today 7 years of very hard work from our staff. And especially if you're starting out on your journey, it could feel a little bit overwhelming. We've experienced that many times in our journey when we go and visit a school. We went to Chicago a couple years ago and saw a school that was probably 10 years ahead of where we are, and it was definitely overwhelming to see, and like all the ideas you have rolling around in your brain about what to do. And I would just encourage you to pick 1, 2, 3 big ideas that you can walk away with, and roll up your sleeves on with your staff and your schools, and just get started. That's been the best thing that we've been able to do. And we've intentionally actually tried to craft our presentation today that is more of a story presentation. We don't want it to feel like a fire hose, because I know what that's like. So hopefully, as we share our journey, you can grab a couple of those big learnings and walk away and have something you can use right away with your schools and your districts. So I would like to introduce our assistant principal, Jonathan Judy. He is going to help kind of facilitate today and launch us into each section one at a time. He's also got a little part in the middle where he talks about our model for our pyramid of interventions. Jonathan comes to us from the Lake Washington School District. He's been here in Monroe for 3 years as our assistant principal, and his background is 15 years as a special ed teacher, mostly on the behavioral side of things. So he's been very instrumental in helping us on our journey and guiding us through some specific components that we've needed help with. So I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan, and you can take it from here.
All right, getting used to the technical things here. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for spending the time with us. In this first section, which we've called Developing a Culture for All, you're going to hear the part of our the background and really the beginning of the Hidden River story on our current journey. The primary thing that we will introduce at the beginning of each section is which inclusionary practice or practices are highlighted in that section. The thing we really want you to walk away with from this section is that inclusionary practices really cannot be separate from the core work of a school. Collaboration has been the primary vehicle for all of the work at Hidden River during this journey. And all of our steps toward improvement is really centered around getting better at collaborating with each other. We believe that the goal of reaching and meeting the needs of every student is really too big for any one of us to achieve on our own. And so the culture here has been really one to develop that sense of interdependence on each other for the work that we're doing in meeting students' needs. Collaboration is really who we are at Hidden River. And that's why we're starting with this part of our story in our conversation today. So Brett's going to come back to talk to you a little bit more about kind of when and where this all started and some of the key steps that were taken and the key moments that were hit in this process of developing a culture for all.
All right, so if prior to our presentation, I was to have been told, you know, the participants can only take away one slide with them back to their context, I would probably pick this one. We have a problem in our educational system, and we all are guilty of it, and that is oftentimes we start with great ideas or new initiatives or whatever you want to call them, and we almost always start with the what and the how. And I just have to say, number one, inclusion is not an initiative. Inclusion is best practice. Inclusion is good for kids. In my mind, there is a moral imperative to this work around inclusion. So however you're infusing this idea of inclusionary practices, I can't stress enough how important it is to ground it in the why behind it. And for us at Hidden River, like, we made some moves very quickly, and I'm convinced that because of our work early on just grounding it in the why and the purpose behind it, our staff was able to grab onto that and move forward. And in fact, our story actually didn't even start with inclusion. The key guiding question we asked about 7 years ago as we were just rethinking our school was, if our own children walk through those doors, what kind of school would we want for our kids? And that really got our staff dreaming about the kind of school that we would be proud to send our own kids to. And the fact of it is that the students that do walk through our doors have parents that care and love them, care about them and love them just as much as we do. So actually it's our obligation to provide a school where kids can thrive. And so that was really the question we used to start this discussion. A follow-up question to that was, we actually looked at, you know, we have 3 years in middle school. I wonder what life looks like for kids that don't make it in our system, like that don't reach that finish line in high school. And when you actually look at the statistics around kids that don't make it, we're basically signing them up for a life of poverty, higher crime rates, incarceration, early death. I mean, those statistics are real. And when you put that kind of information in front of a group of people that are in education for the right reason and want to make a difference, it really causes you to think and say, wow, you know, that's right. Like, we have 3 years with them here in middle school. We have to do our job to get them where we need them to be. And that's kind of how our all means all phrase was born. Was all means we have to do everything in our power to get these kids to grade level, because what we're trying to do in middle school is change the trajectory of the path that they're on that will carry them through high school and open up all kinds of doors for them when they leave our school setting. And that work just changed the game for us as a staff, because from that moment forward, we started to examine and look at lots of things we do within our school, and just is what we do aligning with the things that we believe in and the purpose that we've created together. I think the final piece we use, and I like to point this out, is just sometimes data is a really good way to kind of get a staff to think about it. And at that time, we had twice the number of Fs issued at Hidden River Middle School as our local high school. And they have 4 times the number of kids. And when we put that number on paper, it was like, how in the world do we have that many kids, that many students failing classes? 4 times the number, or twice the number as our high school, with 4 times the number of kids. And really all of that together caused us to just rethink how we do school at Hidden River. And what's interesting is about 2 months into our journey, you know, I said all these things start to bubble up. The very first thing that came to the surface for us that did not align with the things we were committed to was our exclusionary practices at that time that were existing. That was our first like internal conflict. And I'll never forget it. The 2 special ed teachers at the time came in to my office and they said, okay, all means all. There's no way we can do that in our current setup. And we started to dig into that and started to uncover like the things they were doing with those kids. And we had this idea that like we're sending the kids down the hall to the special ed room and they're like sprinkling pixie dust on them down there or something to try to fix them. It's like, that it's not going to work. There's no way we can get these kids to grade level if we keep this current model. And we didn't really know what to do or how to fix it, but we just knew it wasn't working. And so one of the very first things is one of those special ed teachers said, you know what, I have a partner teacher next door who's a general ed teacher. Let's just take these kids into that room. Let's see what happens. And it was like, it wasn't really co-teach. I wouldn't have called it co-teach, but we just like broke the wall down of these kids belong in a gen ed setting. And just to see their shoulders roll back, to see the staff say, you know what, they can do this stuff. Like we've been putting them over here in this classroom and there's no reason why they can't be in here with their peers. And I like to use the phrase like we began to give them their dignity back. It was just eye-opening to see what these kids, how they viewed themselves when we provided them the opportunity to learn alongside their peers. And that was really our first step towards inclusion. It wasn't really, like I said, it wasn't co-teach. It was just, we got to do something different. And I think a takeaway here is that throughout our journey, you will see like we can wait years and years and years to get all the learning and all the training and all the knowledge, but we're paralyzed and not taking action. And our staff has just said, you know what, we know this is right. We're not really sure how to do it yet. We have answers that we still need to look for, but we're going to do it anyways. And we call it learning by doing. We just jump in and we get after it. And I think those first few steps were really critical for our staff at realizing that this is possible. I'm going to turn it over to Robin Lampers, introduce her. She teaches 7th grade language arts here in Monroe, or at Hidden River. She has been instrumental as a leader on the general education side of things, just being open and being a champion of this work. And really her topic this morning is talking about this idea of collaboration. And we have really leveraged PLC work in our building. I would say that our strategy, our quote unquote strategy for achieving our purpose as a school is the components of being a professional learning community and engaging in those questions. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Robin.
All right, thanks, Brett. So one of the most powerful documents that we created back in 2014 with the entire staff during some pretty intense meetings was our foundational document, or what we call our shared commitments. And in this document, it states, we will meet student needs through unsurpassed collaboration. No one is big enough to work independently of others. The combined wisdom of one's peers is greater than any individual. This is foundational to our approach. We work as teams of teachers who teach the same subject in our PLCs. So in order to accomplish this work, our master schedule has been created to give us protected time. Brett and Jonathan don't let anything interrupt this protected time as we're having our PLC meetings. They have worked hard to make sure that our master schedule works this way. These PLC meetings often include all of the gen ed teachers from that subject or that grade level, and our special ed teachers, ELL teacher as well. In ELA, we have both grade level and vertical PLC meetings. During these meetings, we focus our collaboration on solution trees for PLC guiding questions. Question number 1 is, what is it we want our students to know and to be able to do? So in order to answer this question, we took a hard look at the standards and determined which of the standards are essential or non-negotiable. That doesn't mean that we don't address all the standards, but within each subject area, we determine which of the standards are the ones that we're guaranteeing all students will know and be able to do by the end of the year. These essentials are chosen by determining which of the standards have endurance, which means that they have value that goes beyond the single test date, which standards have leverage, that these are skills that are of value in multiple disciplines. And also the third thing is that the knowledge and skills that are necessary for success in the next grade level and beyond. We break down the essential standards as a team by looking at the knowledge and skills and what the students are expected to do in those standards. And then in order to guarantee that students will learn these essential standards, we focus on the next of the 4 guiding questions, which is how will we know if they've learned it? As a team, we develop common formative assessments. These assessments only assess the standard or sometimes just one component of the standard. And after the common assessment is given to all of the students in the grade level, we can analyze the data we have collected, and then we ask the 2 final questions, which are how will we respond when they haven't learned it, and how will we respond if they already know it. This is important because we not only need to address the needs of the students who have not yet learned the information, we need to address the needs of those who need extended learning opportunities as well. As part of our inclusion model, we've eliminated separate honors ELA classes, so it's imperative that we also meet the needs of our accelerated students. The only way to address these 2 questions is as a team. One person can't meet the diverse needs of all the students in a standard classroom, let alone in an inclusion classroom. So one way that we address the diverse needs is with our co-teach model, which Monica will talk a bit more about later. I do want to say one thing about co-teaching. It requires classroom teachers to give up control of their classroom. Doing this involves a mind shift for classroom teachers. The PLC model also does to a degree, but inviting someone into your classroom as an equal partner can be difficult for teachers who have traditionally been in charge of what goes on in their 4 walls, and it can be threatening at times to some people. I want classroom teachers to embrace the opportunity to learn from someone who has different experiences, different teaching style, and gifts that are different than what they have. I've learned so much from the teachers that I've co-taught with, and it's worth the possible discomfort. And you can't go into co-teaching thinking that you can be prepared for it, because it's one of those things that you can learn about, but until you experience it, that's when the learning really begins. So it is very valuable. But co-teaching is limited because not every classroom has a special education teacher, co-teacher. So another way that we meet the needs of all our kids is that we share students with the other teachers in our grade level PLC. We share students during our tier 2 period, which we call hawk time, which is 30 minutes long, but we also do it during our full class periods. We determine which students need reteach or extra scaffolding, which need more practice, and which students need an extension lesson that goes beyond. Then we switch up the kids. It's like a big fruit basket upset. And it takes a bit of coordination, figuring out who goes where and which teacher is going to teach what. But we all take responsibility for all of the 7th graders, and they're all our kids. So it is worth the time that it takes to organize that. And then we have 3 separate lessons going on, and it's incredibly powerful. And the students feel empowered by it. Ideally, we'll do this formative data analysis, student sharing 2 or 3 times within a unit. And we never make any educational decisions without the input of our team. We all have our own teaching styles, and we keep those, but we do our best to leverage each teacher's strengths to meet the needs of all the students. So I would say collaboration is essential to this whole process, and it takes some getting used to, but it's very much worth the time. So if I go back to Brett.
Thank you, Robin. Slide 27 just has some of the helpful resources that we've used, some of the books we've read to as leaders to guide the work. So that's there if you want to dig into some of those. I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan to launch us into our next section.
So section 2 is really trying to get into some of the nuts and bolts and some of the meat around some of the supports and structures that we use here. Specifically, the inclusionary practices that we will be highlighting is our students engaging in core content, multi-tiered systems of support, and then the strategy of co-teaching and co-planning. As we transition from our last section, which really dealt with explicitly telling our story around our culture here at Hidden River, and start looking at a few things that tend to be more kind of on the technical side, it's really important to call out that we believe here that we never actually really leave the place of that cultural work. Even in the title of this section, aligning actions with beliefs, we're leading with that, because what we found is that all of these structures and all of these tools were developed out of a need to deal with a particular challenge that surfaced when we're saying, here's what we believe, we know that we can meet the needs of all kids, and here's where it's not happening. And so even that in and of itself is very much a cultural grounding and framework. So we're gonna be able to dive in and highlight these particular inclusionary practices, but we really want to emphasize over and over again the critical nature of this being cultural work. So you're going to hear a little bit more of our backstory on where we started in this work, where we currently are as a district, and where we currently are as a district. David Parator, our special ed director, is going to introduce you to some of that information. And then you'll be shown a variety of structures and tools and some of the systems we rely on to meet the needs of all students. Brett mentioned earlier that we do have a handbook that is linked at the beginning of this PowerPoint. It will also be linked on the UW website moving forward. There might be a few moments where we hop over to that handbook just really briefly, and that's full of just some of the tools and structures we use. But we're not going to spend a ton of time in that today, just because it can get a little bit overwhelming. We want to kind of stick to our time frames and get the information out there and stick to our storyline here. So, but as we move forward, just continue to keep in mind that every single one of these structures were built specifically in response to a need that emerged by taking small action steps along the way to help us align our actions to our beliefs. So here next with us is David Parator to give us a little bit broader backstory around the district's perspective and journey around inclusionary practices.
Thanks, Jonathan. And this is my 5th year in Monroe School District, and it was really interesting just preparing a little bit for this presentation. It was nice because I was able to kind of reflect on where we were 5 years ago and where we're at now, 5 years into this process district-wide. one of the first things that Nick French and I did as we came into the district 5 years ago, that first summer we did what most special ed directors do. They kind of looked at their data. We looked at our data and kind of dug in a little bit deeper into our programming for students with special needs. A couple of data points that we looked at was, the first thing we looked at was what the students were serving on IEPs. And we have about 800 students who are served with IEPs throughout the district. Of those students, about 80 to 85% of the students had cognitive ability that was at least within the average range. So that tells us that they should be able to benefit from general education curriculum with their peers. The other data point that we looked at was our least restrictive environment data, which LRE. And so that at that time, the state average for students in that least restrictive environment category of 80 to 100% of the time being in general education classrooms, at that time, the state average was 53%, and our school districts percent in that category was 42%. So we were quite a bit below the state average. Additionally, in that second category of students who are on IEPs being in special education 40 to 79% of the time, we had 47% of our students on IEPs missing general education classroom for 40 to 79% of our time. So when we look at those two categories and those two data points, Brett talked a little bit about, as a staff, their internal conflict. That put me into conflict. If our goals were for students to engage in core content, we had students that were capable of engaging in that core content, but our district-wide practice was more of an exclusionary practice. We had some really strong teachers throughout the district, but we were doing more traditional pull-out and replacement type of curriculum services. So the first thing we did that first summer was, we, at our August kickoff special education meeting, we presented the concept of co-teaching and inclusionary practices, and just talked that, as a district, we were going to start moving along those lines of transitioning to more inclusive practices. While that was unsettling for some special education teachers, because that was definitely a change in practice, the special education teachers that was not unsettling to were the special education teachers at Hidden River. Hidden River had already started the process and had started breaking down those walls. At the end of that meeting, the special education teacher there at the time came up to us and said, "We're ready for this at Hidden River. This is what we've been talking about, and this is what we want to do." From that point forward, as from the central office, a lot of what I've done is I've stayed out of the way of the work that they're doing at Hidden River. The culture that Brett and Jonathan created with the teachers, they truly were understanding the concept of all means all. And so within 1 or 2 years, they were providing almost primarily all services within general education classes. So they just really took off with it. When we really, over the last 5 years, some of the things that we've been doing just to sustain that work district-wide is continuing to provide co-teach trainings to teams. And we vary that from elementary cohorts of special education teachers going with general education teachers. That is also one of the keys, is to make sure this is not a special education initiative. So we need to have that general education partnership. So having those teams come to the trainings, learning with each other, and then doing demonstration lessons within their co-teach environments has been really powerful over the last 5 years. You can't do this work. You need that culture change, but then you also need to give everyone the tools to be able to do that. I realized last year that the teams at Hidden River, they got to a level where they were going to sustain this work and it was ingrained in their practice. I had a ELA general education teacher reach out to me and scheduled a meeting because she was concerned that she was not getting one of her students on IEPs up to standard. So we had a meeting, and her internal conflict at that time was, I know how to get students to pass an AP test, but I can't get this student up to standard. She wasn't asking for the student to have pull-out services. She was not asking the special education teacher to take the lead. It was, I can't get, this is one of my students, I don't seem to be able to get her up to standard. We actually had to give her permission to take some of those high expectations off of herself and give herself the permission and grace to allow that student to continue to develop. 5 years in now, when we look at our most recent least restrictive environment data, now as a district, we are at 71% in that 80 to 100% least restrictive category, whereas the state average is 56%. So within 5 years, we've been able to flip that LRE category significantly. Even greater than that is at Hidden River, the number of students that they have now participating 80 to 100% in general education classes is 78%. So almost all of their students, the vast majority of them, are in primarily getting their access to school and getting access to the general education environment. So it shows what you could do in a very relatively brief 5-year period of time. And a lot of that, it comes down to site-based leadership, I think, and really allowing that culture to grow. The teachers at Hidden River are not doing this work because the central office and myself saying, we need to do this because this is what we're doing as a special education department. They're doing it because this is what we do at Hidden River for all students. And so I'll pass this on now to Laura Padock, who's one of our co-teachers at Hidden River.
Good morning. So when we are talking about inclusionary practice for our students, we know that students need to be engaged in core content. And so our guiding question is, what are those structures that we need to ensure that students are accessing and engaging in core content? This guides and drives us as we look at our work at Hidden River and the structures that we choose to put in place. At Hidden River, we know that when we raise the bar, our students will meet it. And so we have those high expectations because we know our students are capable and able to meet them. That's our current reality. So some takeaways that we have with those structures are creating a continuum of services for all students, having goals that are aligned to standards, and creating accommodations that provide access for our students. So if we're looking at a continuum of services, we created our own pyramid of special education services to lay out where students fall and then what kind of services we could be providing for them. So we know that it's not one size fits all in special education, and each student is unique and different. So when we have students come to us, and from year to year, we look at our pyramid to see, where they really can access and receive the most service and be the most successful. So we know that about 80% of our students fall into this bottom tier of our pyramid. So these students are receiving high leverage goals that are tied to essential standards with a focus on generalization. They engage in push-in and co-teach services. There's a visible sense of progress for them. We focus on teaching the process that can be applied to content versus just content. And we create accessible and usable accommodations for them in the general education classroom. In this tier, the general education teacher is the service provider and the special education teacher is the service monitor. So going back to what Robin talked about with collaboration, those two teachers are really working strongly together. The next tier we have is for about 15% of our students who we know need a little bit more. Those students receive everything in where you see that 80% category, as well as this 15%. So remember, when we're looking at a pyramid, it's not I fall here, I fall here. It's here's what we provide, and then we give more support. That doesn't mean that the support below goes away. So when we're looking at big picture with inclusion and a continuum of services, just remember that students could be receiving support from multiple tiers and should be receiving support from multiple tiers. In that 15%, we have adjusted and individualized schedules for students. They may receive some specially designed instruction that's small group, kind of outside of class. So for us, that would be our tier 2 intervention hawk time. Their specially designed instruction supports goal progress that can be generalized to general education. And we work on pre-teaching of skills and concepts. So for those students, we might take some time to pre-teach a skill or a concept to them prior to them seeing it in their general education class so that they're ready for it. We also know that there is a 5% of our students who need even more. Those students have discrete skill goals, modified work and setting, reteach and alternative level teaching, and dedicated replacement SDI. Now, when we're talking about dedicated replacement SDI, if we're looking at academics, that would be our SLC or life skills population of students. All of our other students are really engaging in grade level content in their general education classes academically. When we're giving replacement SDI in a separate setting for students here in that 5%, it's generally around that behavioral piece, organization or social emotional, where they really need discrete teaching for those non-academic skills. Our second key takeaway is that we write goals that are aligned to standards and then written as learning progressions. So here is an example of a goal bank that we created collaboratively as teams, looking at the area of reading. So when we create a goal bank or we are looking at writing goals, the first thing we want to do is look at the grade level standard that is being worked on in the classroom. We want our goals to align to what's being worked on in the classroom because they're meaningful, and then students are getting meaningful practice and teaching that they don't need a replacement for later. So for example, 2 grade level standards would be identifying theme and central idea of a text and making inferences. That's where we would start, in the sense that it's the grade level standard that we're asking, all students to engage in. And then we scale back. So if a student needs more support or they're not ready for that skill, they might be answering explicit reading comprehension questions about a grade level text, where they're identifying sequence, literary elements, and explicit details in a text. It still builds to the grade level standard and it aligns in a learning progression, but it meets them where they're at so that they can be successful. All right. And then our third key takeaway, which is really one that I feel really strongly about, is accommodations that provide access for students. So when we are creating accommodations for students, we're looking for accommodations that can be used across multiple settings, accommodations that are process focused. They allow students to access grade level content. And a huge one is that students know what those accommodations are and they know how to use them and advocate for them. So when we are looking at a student and what they need, part of what we know as a team we will do is have that conversation with students about what works for them and what doesn't. And what we have found is from 6th to 7th to 8th grade, we're really seeing students empowered by those accommodations and using them consistently across grade levels. So we use an accommodations bank that identifies our highest leverage accommodations as a starting point. Jonathan, do you want to drag that over from the handbook? Awesome. Thank you. So here are some just critical accommodations that we always go back to as teams because we know kids use them, we know they utilize them, and we know that they help them be successful. So from an academic perspective, graphic organizers, computer for written work, guided notes, multiple opportunities to show proficiency, those are all really powerful for students. From an organization, behavior, social, emotional perspective, daily check-ins, the use of the use of a planner, sensory breaks, the use of a daily target sheet, high interest tasks to allow students to demonstrate proficiency. Those are all accommodations that we go back to as teams because we know they work and we know that they work in the gen ed classroom and they help students be successful. One of those accommodations that I just kind of noted is graphic organizers, and high leverage graphic organizers are huge in our work. They can be used across multiple settings. They are process focused versus content focused, so students are able to use them again and again. Those graphic organizers have been developed by our teams. So when I say that, I mean, like for me, working mostly in English language arts. Our graphic organizers were developed with the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade English language arts teachers to provide continuity and consistency for students across grade levels and to provide something that truly works for kids. So they weren't created in isolation. It goes back to that collaboration piece. They were really created as teams because we can't do it alone. None of us can do it alone. So these are made for students to use from grade level to grade level across content. They might even be using something like this in science, this race strategy for short answer response. So we really use those accommodations and those graphic organizers as a way for students to access content and meet them where they're at. Finally, when we're looking at our social, emotional, behavioral, and organization goals, we set those up so that they can be monitored in general education settings and so that they are based on skills that students can use and practice in the general education settings. So again, they're high leverage goals such as proactive communication, coping, self-advocacy, or following a classroom routine. And these are really monitored through feedback and collaboration with students' general education teachers. So a student might have a check-in with me as their case manager, maybe beginning, end of the day, maybe once a week. If I'm in their gen ed class, I might give them feedback. But the people who are managing it and giving them feedback and helping them through those difficult situations are their general education teachers. So again, we're right back to that collaboration piece, to that really being a team. Students are not looking to me as, oh, you're my person. They're looking at their entire team of teachers that is really there for them, giving them feedback and helping them gain those skills.
All right, so one of the critical pieces of work across the entire school at Hidden River has been the evolution of multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS. Laura actually kind of did a teaser for that, just looking at our special ed pyramid. And so that in and of itself is evidence of really the use of that framework and how that's applied in multiple contexts. And whether it be for our whole school-wide system, whether it be for special ed services specifically, sometimes we even debrief behavioral incidents along the lines of if things went sideways with a student, what sort of supports did we provide that are considered tier 1 supports? And then as a behavioral incident sort of continues, did that student have access to some of our next step interventions? And then for some of our more severe behaviors, again, are there some individualized interventions that people know about and can use for that particular student that as things necessitated the use of those interventions, people had the ability to apply them. So the idea of thinking about what are we providing for all students, what are we providing for some students who need a little bit more, and then what individualized supports are we providing is really interwoven into the day-to-day work at Hidden River. And it's really kind of approached from this guiding question. How do we respond when students don't learn it the first time? What does each student need? Recognizing that there's a combination of systems work that needs to occur as an entire school, as well as the core academic team collaboration work that needs to occur for these systems and these supports to be in place for students. So we're in a moment, we're gonna look at the Hidden River, what we call the pyramid of interventions. One of the things we wanna come back to and just encourage everybody on is just the idea that to build the pyramid one intervention at a time. To remember, number one, we can't intervene our way out of some of the challenges that we're facing. And so it's really critical to take to spend the time that we need to spend at that tier 1 to make sure that we are providing supports and structures and systems that all of our kids can access. To that end, we kind of tore a page out of Mike Mattis's book, and his influence has been really critical in our work. As he looks at this work, he suggests to invert the pyramid, and for our thinking, that really resonates with us and makes sense because we're leveraging the mental model of gravity, that everything that students, the things that we're providing for all students, those continue to flow down even as students might need more targeted and more intensive supports. So you can see, I'm not going to go into all of the detailed examples here, and this pyramid is in the handbook as well. But on this right side, you'll see there are team-led supports here. And one of the critical pieces of work that we're continuing to just hone and get better at is the idea of that upper right. What are the teacher teams doing to ensure that students are engaging in core content and having access to the things that they need within the classroom? So you'll see a list there of some of the things Laura has already mentioned. One of the pieces that you'll hear a little bit more about it in our journey towards improvement is we're constantly going back to the PLC framework's 5 essential team actions, which number 1, are we identifying our most essential learnings together? Number 2, are we unpacking those? And then third, assessing them in a way that we know we have a good idea of what the specific needs of students are that are emerging. And then we are reteaching and providing an opportunity for reassessment within that tier 1. And then the last sets of steps have to do with our response, which are more those tier 2 steps. Are we, what are the things that we're putting in place as a teacher team to ensure that students are getting the targeted reteaching that they need, and that are giving us the evidence that we're impacting their learning. One of the powerful things about this is that it really builds a sense of collective efficacy, because the process really looks like this. What's the particular learning problem that we're having? Let's get together as a group of educators and professionals and think through what systems do we have to have some sort of impact on that specific problem. Are they on the teacher team side, or are they things that we as a school can build and develop? And then as we put interventions in place and we see the impact on those students, that's self-reinforcing for the pieces that we have put in place. And that's really what builds that sense of efficacy. And so by putting these steps in place and having a framework that anchors us that we can go back to, it provides us the opportunity again to kind of come back to that. We believe that all students can make progress. When it's not happening, what are the steps that we're taking to do that? And then when we see the impact on students, what we've just done is built a whole new set of skills for ourselves and reinforce the beliefs that kids can make progress. And it gets us out of that, some of the old ways of thinking that can lead to kind of a sense of hopelessness or despair when we're not reaching kids. So again, all of the things that are on this list are things that were developed out of a particular need that emerged at a particular point in time. So just kind of that key takeaway to be engaging in those, like that mental thinking of what's our next step and what do we need to develop to take that next step. At this point, I'm going to introduce Monica Byerly to you guys. Monica is a co-teacher. She's a special ed case manager who has actively worked on our math team the last few years. She was a critical part of the beginning of Hidden River's journey on co-teaching and has just been a huge champion for kids through the years. And she's going to talk in particular about one of the particular frameworks and strategies that we use, which is co-teaching and co-planning, so that she can tell her story and some of the things that she's learned over the years through that process.
All right, so I don't have these points outlined in the slides, so I encourage you to take some notes. So I've been co-teaching at Hidden River for 4 years now, and these are kind of, in thinking through this, some of the main takeaways that I've had to help you in your journey. So as Jonathan mentioned, the number one thing that helps support students in this continuum of services is going to be through co-teaching and co-planning. So when we look at co-teaching, we need to look at it as a partnership, and oftentimes in trainings it's referred to as a marriage, where inside of a marriage you need to build trust, you need to cultivate a relationship, and an understanding and respect for one another. And when you do this, you're able to provide that cohesive instruction and that, you know, really warm and inviting environment for your students. So this takes time, it takes flexibility, it takes an open mind towards another person's ideas, and it definitely doesn't happen overnight. It's a process. The next part that's really essential is that co-planning piece. Co-planning is actually where that trust and strength of the co-teaching relationship starts. So ideally, co-planning would be built into your master's schedule, where teachers could have common prep time in order to do this co-planning. But we understand that that's not always the case. In our building, we have 2 teachers. Laura does language arts and I do math, and we have 3 grade levels, and we have multiple teachers we work with. So it's impossible for us to have the exact same prep with all of these teachers, so we do get creative. And again, that's part of that flexibility piece. Robin mentioned earlier that that willingness to sort of give up your classroom if you're a general education teacher, just like in a marriage where you're going to live together inside of a house in co-teaching, you're going to want shared spaces inside your classroom. This could be 2 teachers having 2 desks in the room in 2 different spots, or even up in the same area. It could be putting both names on the doors, so when people walk by, they know that that classroom has 2 teachers in it and not just 1. So sharing an understanding of, or shared understanding of your roles and responsibilities. So we laid this out as kind of a guideline on pages 11 and 12 in our handbook, but that kind of gives you an idea for, you know, who might be the lead or co-lead on a lesson. It might not always be that the general education teacher is going to take the lead on every single lesson. Sometimes a special education teacher might be the one teaching while the general education teacher supports. Who's going to take attendance? Who's going to monitor behaviors? All of these are shared roles and responsibilities you have in the classroom. Here's another thing is, we as special ed teachers email out and request for input from general education teachers on students' performance that we include in that team considerations portion of the IEP. And I find it's really important for general education teachers, even if I'm a teacher in the classroom, I want their input on a student because they share that student, and it's part of that mentality of sharing students. I want their perspective on the student, and I want parents to see the general education teacher's perspective on a student. So that's also part of that shared roles in the classroom. Shared tools. So the next slide is going to show you an example of one of our shared tools. This is kind of getting down into what it would look like to plan a lesson together, not necessarily a unit, but shared tools are really helpful in that co-planning piece. They allow you to determine who's going to teach what accommodations and supports you might use on any given day. And so we use this tool when we plan together. We use sheets to track data, and when we do that, that helps us to analyze student progress towards essential skills and then determine, you know, collectively as a teaching team, how we're going to, where they might go in our RTI, our school's RTI process to meet their needs, whether or not we're going to put them in a hawk time for a reteach, or if we're going to break them out into small groups for another reteach inside the classroom. So again, that's, those shared tools are really essential in your co-planning. So another thing, when you address your class and all of a sudden you have this other teacher in the room, I really encourage you to use the word we as much as possible instead of I. And what this does is this shows students that they have two teachers that they can go to for questions and help. And it also helps the teacher who's now come into your classroom to feel like they have a place in there, a place of authority with the students. So one guideline, one rule of thumb is that when you have people come and visit your building and walk into your classroom, if they cannot tell who the general education teacher is and who the special education teacher is, you know you're doing a really good job of co-teaching. Classroom management styles, talk through those. You might have different ways that you deal with classroom management, but you definitely want to have a shared understanding of how to deal with classroom management. Another important thing is tearing off those labels. So when students come to us as sixth graders, most often they have been in pull-out models for their core content, their reading, writing, and math. And all of a sudden they come to our classroom and they're in a general education classroom. So it's really important. We don't ever refer to our kids as special education kids or gen ed kids. They're just, that's kind of that all means all. They're all of our kids. So it's really important for teachers to have that same mentality that inside this classroom, these are our kids, not these are my kids and these are your kids. So again, tearing off that special education label from students and just looking at all students like they're gen ed students, because at this point in this model, they really are gen ed students who we just use a variety of tools to support them in a general education classroom. So another thing that's really important to think about is that oftentimes kids will come in and they have behaviors that oftentimes mask what they actually know. So it's really important to identify what is a behavior versus an ability and then provide those necessary supports. Celebrating all growth is probably one of the most powerful, successful things that we do as teachers and as a building. And when we celebrate growth, I think sometimes, I know I've learned through this that a celebration is not about a student meeting grade level proficiency. Oftentimes that's an unrealistic expectation when you have a student that arrives to your school and they are 3 to 4 grade levels behind and you're trying to close that gap. To expect them to meet proficiency at grade level and that is your marker for success. I like to tear that off and actually look at how did they perform on that district assessment? Did they go up in grade level? How did they do on the same test that everyone else took in the class? Did they answer our, what we call our DOK 1 or 2 grade level skill independently on our own? That's amazing. Like, to me, that is huge success. And then of course, you know, we celebrate if they do meet that proficiency level, but really just share that success with your co-teacher and share it out with your building when you see success in students' growth. So in the end, I'm just gonna wrap up. It's really important to remember that co-teaching, it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of patience, but it is well worth the effort and the journey when you watch that gap close through your very highly intentional instruction and models and teamwork.
So on the next slide here, we have a few of the books again that we have referenced a lot. I want to highlight this book, Yes We Can, as a critical resource for us, just giving some really specific tools for how to really build a sense of collaboration between special educators and general educators. And again, I want to reference our handbook. I know in the presentation itself, we're kind of blasting through pretty quickly. In the handbook itself, there are a lot of tools that we've taken inspiration from some of this work that's shown on this page and kind of given them feet in the Hidden River context. So again, you'll have access to that to sort of wade through some of those resources as well in a little bit more detail. We're going to go back to Brett for introducing our last section here, which is the commitment to continuous improvement. We're looking at this both as kind of our last section and the cultural work that we're always doing, but also looking at that as a critical inclusionary practice. So back to Brett to kind of bring us home here for this last section.
All right, yeah, I'm just kind of keeping track of time here. We've got a few minutes left. I really want to make sure we get to Ashley Castillo, our life skills teacher. She's gonna share a student story that's really powerful that I think just wraps it all up. But just real quick, you know, this idea that leadership matters in this work. I mean, that's fairly obvious, but it really is so critical that as leaders we're paying attention to the right things and helping our teachers focus on the right things. I love this visual on slide 39. We stole this from Woodlawn Middle School back in Chicago, and we kind of experienced this, but we never really put words to it. But it's this idea that we have our comfort zone, but where the magic happens in a school, like you're constantly reaching for something more. And I think it really speaks to the idea that we're never there. Like we've never made it. There's always something better we can do. And I think as a leader, it's a really fine balance between pushing a staff too hard and not hard enough. Like what's the sweet spot for what we're ready for as a staff and the next step we can take. And, you know, make no mistake that we're going to take next steps. It's always kind of a matter of, are we ready for it? Do we need to pause and breathe a little bit? Like what's that next thing we're going to reach for, and really paying attention to our staffs throughout this journey. But I love that visual. It's on my board behind me, and it's just something I remind myself all the time as a principal. I think some of the key leadership moves we've taken, I mean, I won't go through all these on slide 40 there, but I think for us, we've learned it's really important to filter out what's not essential for our staff and our school, and to really help our teams focus on what's most important. I mean, you guys know we've got things coming at us from all directions in education, and how do we just really peel back the layers and make sure we're paying attention to the right things and giving our teachers time to do the work, and trying to shield them from stuff that really doesn't fall in line with the things we need to be spending our time on. I think celebration has been just really important. We pretty much every staff meeting, every team meeting, anytime we get together as a staff, we always take a few moments to spotlight each other for the great work that we're doing, or we call it all means all stories. So we'll often share stories of kids that are just, you know, blowing us away with the things they can do. And it's just a continual reminder on purpose that, you know, sometimes when we get down and we get frustrated, like there's so many great stories to share throughout the journey. And I found as a leader, like that celebration component is really important. I think encouraging our teachers to take a risk and then being ready for them when they need that support, that's been huge for us. This work takes a ton of courage. It also takes the ability to say, you know what, we're going to live in our hopes and our dreams. We're not going to live in our fears. And I think as leaders, we have to give our teachers permission to acknowledge the fearfulness in some of this, but we're going to take steps in courage based on what we hope and what we dream for the kids and the end result that we're shooting for. I'm gonna bring Laura in real quick. Laura, why don't you just talk about, we've got 3 kind of most important takeaways, lessons we've learned, and then we're going to get it over to Ashley to finish it out with a story about one of our students.
Sorry, I was still muted. In terms of the most important lessons that we have learned through this work and through this journey, starts with learning by doing. So we know that everything occurs through action. So it's through action that we change our beliefs about what kids can do. That would mean that we become less hesitant when we do it. You know, we do have concerns, we might have hesitations, we might have fears, but through that action, our belief in what kids can do and who they are truly changes. Through action, we change our beliefs about what we're capable of as educators and teams. And through action, we create a new paradigm of what school is for all kids and all students, as well as for teachers. Another lesson we learned is it is okay to start small, and early wins are huge. We are never going to be 100% ready to implement something that's perfect and that works seamlessly. That's not our world in education or our world in general. So it's okay to start with something small and build from that and celebrate, you know, those small wins, those small victories, because those turn into those big wins and those big victories. The final and biggest lesson I would say is that this is work for all of us. We're all responsible. It's not as Brett said, a special ed initiative. It's not an administrator push through. This is truly a cultural shift where every single person in our building, from teachers to admin to custodians to office support staff, believe in this work and are champions of this work. And it's through that that we truly make change and are successful for our students so that they can be successful in their lives moving forward.
All right, as we move to Ashley, in the slide deck there's slides on things we're continuing to work on currently, if you're interested. Obviously, like for us, we've had dramatic increases in our data in lots of areas. Behavioral, our failure rates are way down. Huge increases in our honor roll. High growth on the Smarter Balance compared to what it used to be. I mean, our kids just weren't showing much growth. I want to show you real quick just a visual representation of that. Our state used to have the achievement data captured this way, and we've got a newer way of looking at it now, but I always appreciate the growth component of that. In 2013-14, if you look at our data, if you want to look at that far side, the growth piece, really our students weren't growing or kind of average or below average. You know, all those oranges and reds are not what you want to see when you're talking about student growth. You know, we can't control where they're at when we get them, but we sure can control what we do with our students when they get here. And there's really no excuse for not being able to help our students grow tremendously while we have them here at Hidden River. So just in 2 years, and this was before we really even got down into the weeds on what we were trying to accomplish, you can see just by focusing on the right things, in 2 years, we had turned all those cells on the growth side of it into the blue, which for us, I mean, that's just I love that visual because it just shows the power of what a staff can accomplish when we put our heads together. We literally made a million mistakes those first couple of years, and we still do, but you can see when we're all pulling the same direction, what we can do for our kids in just a short amount of time. So we're gonna end with Ashley Castillo. She's gonna introduce you to Mitzi. Mitzi came to us as a life skills student, and just her story for all of us here in the building, like it, you know, every time we hear her story, we get tears in our eyes because it's such a great example of all of what we talked about making a difference for one child. So I'll turn it over to you, Ashley.
Okay. So there's been so many success stories of students who are included in general education and who gain access to grade level curriculum. And we wanted to share this particular student story because her journey was one where she started middle school in our low incidence program and transitioned to high school with full access to grade level general education. Mitzi transferred a little bit of her story. She transferred to us from another district, and she needed a reevaluation really quickly. And during the evaluation, they weren't really able to get a great picture of her abilities because she was really new to the school. She was really nervous and upset, and she's socially a very, very shy person. So this made it hard to get a clear picture of who she was and what she knew. Mitzi was placed in a self-contained setting, which we call at Monroe the Structured Learning Center, or Life Skills. So during 6th grade, when she was at Hidden River, a general education math teacher requested to have some students from the SLC class come to her gen ed class to work on some social interactions and have some time with their gen ed peers. The math teacher quickly realized that Mitzi was able to access higher level work than her teachers had thought. So the school psych, who was highly involved in the classroom, proposed an early reevaluation to get some more accurate present levels. All of this really to say that the adults believed this student could access more, so they took the steps to make it happen. So by May of her 6th grade year, and with an updated present levels, her teacher asked her, what do you want? Do you want more time in gen ed next year? Are you more comfortable in the SLC classroom? What do you want? And Mitzi advocated that she was actually feeling really, really bored and wanted a 7th grade schedule that was more like her peers. So she was placed in co-teach ELA and math and had a full inclusion general education schedule. By 8th grade, her teachers noticed she was struggling with the social component. And when she advocated that she felt lonely and disconnected when she was at school, so she identified some students she wanted to spend some time with, and her teachers helped her break in with those students, and they actually became her friend group, advocates and supports in and out of the classroom. So what you see here is a child who started in the system in a fully restricted environment, who felt unable to voice what she wanted or needed. And by the time she went to high school, she had full access to general level, grade level curriculum, and had formed some lasting friendships with her typically developing peers. That's Mitzi's story.
Thank you, Ashley. And by the way, we did get permission to use Mitzi's name and her picture, and it's one of many stories of kids here at Hidden River that when we ask the right questions, when we focus on what kids need, they blow us away every time with what they can actually do. And this is a student who, as Ashley mentioned, was in life skills, our most restrictive classroom. And by the time she left, she was in gen ed like everybody else and doing really well. So I think, you know, we can look at all the data and show you all that, but really what it comes down to is what this work means for individual students. And when you start to put names and faces to those success stories, it's pretty cool for a staff to see their work unfolding and making the difference in the lives of each of these kids one at a time. So I want to thank you for allowing us to share our story. I know we've got hopefully some questions that you guys have that we can try to help answer. And again, if we don't get to all of them, we love helping schools and being a resource. So don't be afraid to reach out after the webinar, and we can be that support for schools in our state as much as possible. So I'm going to send it back to you, Rena Marie.
Right, thank you. On behalf of the UW Hanna Center, we'd just like to extend a tremendous thank you to Hidden River Middle School for sharing this really inspirational journey. And we really do appreciate that this has been a long process. And as you celebrate your successes, that moving forward, that you appreciate there's still room for growth. And I think that was powerful to share Mitzi's story, because at the end of the day, this is what we're all doing it for, is for those our primary stakeholders, right, of our students and their families. So at this time, I would like to ask participants in the chat box if you could share what are the systems, culture, and our leadership practices you heard about today that support inclusive schools. And with that, from what you've learned today, what are some initial steps that you can take to apply in your building? And again, this is all information that we'll be able to look at later. So we appreciate you taking the time to share that in our chat box. I'll give you a minute to do that, and then we'll move into question and answer with our Hidden River team. Great. Culture, 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 intentional focus of PLCs. I'm seeing celebration, continuum of special education supports. Take small steps and celebrate failure. Including teachers asking what they want for their students. Oh, so they're excited to start co-planning. Pyramid of special education. Oh, this is great. As we move into our Q&A, I want to encourage everybody to please keep sharing in the chat box. What are your takeaways from today? We can go ahead and move to the next slide and share all of our team. First question here is, can you share lessons you've learned about meaningfully engaging families in implementing inclusion as a cultural initiative?
That's a really great question. I think that's an important one. I'll never forget the first time like we had an incoming 6th grade class where it was like, okay, we're going from pull out to inclusion. I remember in that 6th grade information night in like April or May or whenever it was, a lot of parents like really nervous, and our 2 feeder schools at the time were not inclusionary schools the way we are now. And I think the biggest thing we did was just took the time to listen. We didn't try to like convince them and do all that. We're really good listeners, I think. And we just kind of went slow to go fast, and just acknowledged the fears and the worries, and kind of took their concerns one by one and just addressed like, here's how we're planning on addressing that. And I think really viewed, and David, you can weigh in on this too, because I know you field a lot of this, but really viewed our families as partners in this journey. And to be honest, like most of our families of students that have an IEP were pretty excited about our shift, and gave us some grace and really walked alongside us, and haven't been afraid to point out like things that we're not doing well, and we really appreciate that. So David, do you have anything to add?
No, just that I think the biggest piece for families was just explaining to them the benefits that their students would get. Brett mentioned it in the beginning. A lot of families feel like having a pull-out service means that they're going to get more powerful instruction, and that's going to get their kids to standard right away. And so I think it was building that trust with families that getting that access to general education content is really going to pay off in the long run. And it was pretty quick. The calls of concerned parents from me were more around this, because their kids had never done this before. And so I think once we got through that hurdle, I think it's just built upon itself, and it's gotten a lot easier over the 5 years, because now all of our schools are doing some level of inclusionary practices. So it's not such a big shift for families. We're doing this at both of our middle schools as well. So we've been able to build it across all levels. So I think that transition has gone a lot smoother. I also I host monthly parent meetings at our parent hub, where parents just come and ask questions. So a lot of it, as the parent community are talking to each other, I think they're able to dispel the myths as well.
Can I just add that a lot of the cultural aspects that you've heard about in the presentation today, that's inclusive of our families and our parent community, right? So any approach that we would use with families is all interwoven into that same approach. One of the phrases that was not used is the idea of being really strengths-based. And I would say, I think every IEP is an opportunity to really highlight student strengths and truly kind of that culture of celebration and celebrating small growth. You heard a lot about that. I think sometimes when we develop IEPs, the strengths section can either be sort of a checkbox, or it can be almost a backhanded compliment. And so our team, Laura and Monica and Ashley in particular, as they facilitate that process, they are very, very competent at highlighting student strengths, and then also advocating for those student strengths and how to leverage those in the general ed environment. And so that's a significant part of, from an IEP case management standpoint, every day as an opportunity to continue advocating for this particular approach and model.
Great, thank you. This next one is relating to a piece that Laura shared. Are the goals that you were talking about for all students, or are they for IEP goals?
So those would be looking at how we write IEP goals, aligning that to those standards that are already being taught in the classroom at grade level.
Thank you. I'm going to share two more. This question is, I'm wondering if students engaging in core includes more than math and ELA?
Yeah, it does. I mean, our kids are in all classes. The co-teaching happens in only math and ELA. I mean, we only have so much staffing to make that happen. But one of the things we have done is recast how we use our para staff. And so for some of the other areas like science and social studies, we really leverage our paras, that they're assigned to kids and go in to support those students in other core subjects also. So even though we're not co-teaching in science and social studies and some of these other areas, we have students in all those classes, and we still provide the support as needed.
Great. Along with your Hawk time, could you describe your daily schedule? Do you have 6 periods per day, block periods, advisory time, etc.?
Jonathan, you want to take that one?
Well, our schedule has 6 periods per day. We have 30 minutes every single day as an intervention period. We call it our Hawk time. That is a flexible intervention period, so students can rotate classrooms based on kind of a rostering system that we have and we use. I'll actually pull that over here so you can just get a visual of what that looks like. We also run an A day, B day schedule for electives. And so PE is every other day. That was actually a solution that was arrived at because the PE teachers were advocating for students to have activity throughout the year rather than in semesters. So it's an every other day schedule with PE and an elective. For some of our students, if there's a replacement class, some of the kind of that upper part of the pyramid that you saw earlier, it likely might be what we call a tier 3 core academic, either for reading or for math. That is not just a special education course. That's for any student who was kind of a starting point criteria as a level 1 on the SBA and those skills. So that's also a mixed general ed, special ed population in those tier 3 academic support classes. And then Laura mentioned earlier the behavior, organization, social skills classes that could occur every other day as well. So students generally are not taken out of both elective times, so they are able to retain their electives with the A day, B day. But yeah, the Hawk time, the intervention period rotates per day, and there's a prioritizing system that happens amongst our grade levels. Each team has a designated time per week where they're able to divide up students and have some targeted reteaching.
I will add to, like, just for more of the principals out there, like master schedule. I mean, the very first time I heard Rick Dufour speak, I remember him saying, the only thing we're bound by is when the bus drops the kids off and when they leave. Like, everything else is under our control. And I remember thinking, oh, there's not a lot we can do with our master schedule. But once you say, you know what, let's start over. Let's go back to the drawing board. We're going to work within the confines of the contract. But really, you know, there's a lot we can do in the schedule. It just takes a lot longer to figure it out. And every year our master schedule has gotten more and more specific around trying to support the needs of kids. And so I think sometimes, like, our own mindset feels like we're kind of stuck with our schedule, but there's all kinds of creative things that we can do to provide more time and support for kids. And I just think it just kind of takes a team approach, and just being willing to try something different and spend a little more time creating that schedule. But there's a lot we can do within our schedules if we really try to make it happen and kind of get a lot of brains on it as we're putting it together. So that's been our approach as far as the master schedule is concerned.
And I would add that Brett and Jonathan have included teachers in that planning. So having that master schedule team where there are teachers who can, you know, give input and also have a little bit of a different lens actually allows more creativity and flexibility within the schedule, because then it's not Brett and Jonathan saying, here's the schedule, good luck. There are teachers going, well, what if we did this? Or we'd be really willing to try it this way. So there's more buy-in as well. It feels less like something that's being imposed upon you as a teacher, and more a schedule that you have gotten to help cultivate in a way that makes sense for kids.
Oh, Thank you. I think you've also addressed some other questions that were there regarding scheduling and co-planning. And so at this time, I just want to, I'll wrap up the Q&A portion and remind people that the presentation as well as the artifacts that Hidden River Middle School shared will be available on our website. And we'll go into the next slide, which has a link to our website, so you can visit that. And the team has also been very generous to share their emails in their presentation. And so if you have more questions or specifics, you're welcome to reach out to them as well. But there's our website there. And then the second link is that you can also learn more about our project on the OSPI website there too. In conclusion, again, I would like to engage everybody in a collaborative activity here. Here's an interactive poll. If you could share in one word, what are the systems, culture, and our leadership practices you heard about today that support inclusive schools? There's two ways that you can join our poll. The first is that you could go online at pollev.com/UW Herring Center to enter the poll, or you can text UW Herring Center to the number 22333. And once you're in, then you can go ahead and put your word there. Thank you. And I'll go ahead and put that link into our chat box.
Rena, do I need to share my screen?
Oh, yes, please. Thank you.
So pass it to me.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's see that. Okay. Okay.
And I'll put some, I've shared the link in our chat box as well. Great. We've got collaboration.
Rena, it doesn't look like they're coming up here.
Okay. Let's see if we hover on the top right and click show responses.
Yep.
Let's see if that, okay.
Try again.
Okay, yes.
Activating, let's do that first.
Okay.
Again. Okay.
There we go.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
There we go.
Inclusion, collaboration, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. As we have this going, we also just a reminder at the conclusion of our webinar today, Molly, you'll be receiving an email from Molly, which has a link to our evaluation form. And we appreciate that feedback as we continue to do more webinars. We will take that feedback as we move forward. So we appreciate that. And in addition, you'll also receive your form for clock hours. Thanks so much, Hidden River. That was amazing.
You bet. Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
And you'll notice that the ones that are getting bigger are the ones that people are saying over and over again. So the collaboration is coming through, team and culture.
That's pretty cool.
All right, this is great. Rena Marie, should we move into the evaluation?
Yes, thank you.
That's great. Oops.
Okay.
Let's see.
Thank you. Yes, and to wrap up, here is a link to a Google form with our evaluation. And again, this will be emailed to all participants. And lastly, we'd like to thank OSPI and CSTEP for their partnership in this project. And another tremendous thank you to Hidden River Middle School for your inspiring work. Thanks to you all for joining us today to learn more about inclusionary practices and for envisioning how you might take some of what you learned today and apply it to your schools. We hope you will join us for future webinars and that when your doors open again, you will take advantage in person of visiting our Washington State demonstration sites. Thank you, everyone.